And Senator Paxton, let me begin by asking you if you thought in the end, with all that happened, with the big list of agenda items going into the session that you all pledged to tackle, do you think it was a good session? Do you come back to your district and tell people we did the right amount of work on the right issues for you guys, or were there misses?
I think you can always say there are good things about a session and there are things that you wish had gotten done.
Right.
In my opinion, there were a lot of good things happening with transportation and water, but on the other hand, we had a struggle with the budget and how much we spent.
Right.
We also, there's more we could have done with tax relief. We had some tax relief for small businesses, but there was more we could have done. So, I've never gone through a perfect session, and I don't think they exist. And
this was not a perfect session, but pretty good.
Decent.
Pretty good.
Yeah.
Representative Leach, you obviously had observed politics and the legislature closely from the outside before running this last time. So you don't really have anything to compare this to from a personal experience standpoint. But did you come out of it thinking this is a good session?
I did. Texas is obviously growing. It's an exploding state.
Right.
We've got 26 million people who are living here now. By the year 2050, we're projected to have 50 million. Since the year 2000, if you combine the populations of Montana, Wyoming, North Dakota, South Dakota, Alaska, and Vermont, if you combine the populations of those states, that's how many people have either been born in Texas or have moved here since 2000. So much of that growth has been here in Collin County. So from a perspective of coming back home, having voted my district and represented the people who sent me to office, I would say yes, we had a very successful session in terms of figuring out how do we make sure the kids that are going to be coming here are going to be educated? How do we make sure that businesses and families have water to live on? How do we make sure we have the roads we need across the state to get products across so people can travel across the state? And so yes, I thought we had a good session. There are things, of course, that we didn't get done that I would like to have seen us focus on more, but for the most part, we did have a good session.
Felt pretty good. I want to go issue by issue on a couple of the things you mentioned and one big thing you didn't. In fact, I want to start with the big thing that I think you didn't mention that is a concern of everybody in this state, and that's public education. You were not in the 82nd session, Representative Leach. You were Representative Paxton at the time, and there was a historic cut to public education funding made necessary by the budget shortfall. You all came back in hoping to do something about that, and Senator Paxton, you put $3.5 billion, or maybe even a little bit more, back into public education this time. Was that an acknowledgement that you made a mistake last time in cutting it?
No, I think, the other thing that you didn't bring up is there was another 1.7 that we put back for some of the deferrals. So really it ended up being over $5 billion. So no, I think, you've always got to figure out how you're going to allocate your money. In last session, if you'll remember, we didn't have the revenue that we had this time. So, we're not Washington. We can't print money. And we don't have that same opportunity. And so we have a budget. We have so much money, just like a lot of these cities and counties. There's only so much money, and we have to decide how it's going to get allocated. So, I think with education, transportation, water, we're probably never quite satisfied with what we do.
Yeah.
We just do the best we can with what we have, and I think we did that.
Are you in the camp, Senator Paxton, of those who believe that money is a big factor in the quality of the public ed? This is a big debate. Is there a correlation between the amount of money you spend? We were at 41st among the 50 states in Washington, D.C. in per-student spending on public ed before the 2011 session. By the time we got into session this time, we were 49th. Now, we're going to go back up with the work that you all did. But a lot of people, that concerns them, that we're not spending as much as other states, and they want to see our system improve. They think money's the root there.
I think it's one of the issues, but it's not everything. I mean, there's a balance. I mean, you can look at different businesses that operate on less money and do it more effectively. So I think it's a combination of looking at it every term, every session, and trying to figure out what are we doing well, what are we not doing well, what are we doing horribly, and try to allocate money based on those factors.
Did you find when you campaigned last election, Representative Leach, that your district was concerned about the public ed cuts? And did you come in pledging to do something?
Well, I'm glad you asked that, because I was actually going to mention that during the campaign, we literally knocked on thousands of doors in my district. And sitting here in Richardson, you're within 5 or 10 miles of 4 of the largest high schools in the state of Texas. Are right here. 3 of them are in my district. And so education is very important. To be honest with you, the doors I knocked on, the parents I talked to, even the teachers I talked to, their main issue was not so much with funding, but was with testing. And so House Bill 5 was a huge win for public education in Texas. Yes, funding is an issue. It's an issue specifically for my district, for Plano Independent School District. One of the reasons I voted against the budget is because there were school districts across the state, when we restored funding to public education, there were school districts across the state that got more from a percentage basis refunded to them than Plano did. And that's a problem to me. So we have a systemic problem with public education funding. I think it's going to be a big issue next session. But House Bill 5 specifically was a huge win for students across the state.
I want to come to the testing thing because as there are so few bipartisan issues in this legislature, that was certainly one of them. But on the funding issue, as you know, every couple of years we have a lawsuit against the state of Texas that almost always results in us finding that the system of funding public education is unconstitutional. Well, we're in the middle of one of those cycles right now. Now, it's a question of whether what you did during the session, Senator Paxton, will cause the judge in Austin who ruled the state to be out of compliance, whether he'll rethink that now. But we're in the middle of a lawsuit, in theory, in which the judge and the Supreme Court, if they uphold it, they could come back and say, you all need to put $10 billion a year back into public education.
That's correct. And actually, I think I didn't read much about it. I saw that there was a little blurb today about the judge potentially rethinking whether we actually need.
Well, you all may have actually caused him
Right.
to have a second thought about his ruling, but the point is there is this ever-thus problem. You all think you fixed the problem. School districts sue. The court side with the school districts. You have to blow the thing up again and then restart. We can put a man on the moon. I can pause live television, but we can't fix school finance.
You know, one of the challenges we have, Evan, is just that, you know, the Constitution is fairly vague about our responsibilities. It talks about, you know, providing a general diffusion of knowledge in an efficient system. Well, what exactly does that mean? And I think that's
different people see it as differently.
That's exactly right. And so there's a struggle between, you know, different people as to how you define what that means and what that means as far as dollars. And is it just dollars?
Should you have put more back in this time, Senator, than 3.5 or the 1.7 in deferrals?
So we ended up with 5. You know, I think we did our best. I mean, I'd always like to put more into
You're
education.
happy with where you ended
Well,
up?
no, I'd say I'm never happy. I'd always like to put more into education. Like I said, I'd like to put more into transportation. But we have to allocate dollars. I think we did our best given the resources we had. But satisfied? No, I'd love to put more in.
On the testing issue that you brought up, Representative Leach, I think at last count it was something like 91% of school boards around the state, representing 95% of enrolled students, had passed resolutions saying, going into the session, they were not happy with the current, what was then the current regimen of standardized tests. So you got it down from 15 to 5. Would you have liked to see it go to 0, or is 5 seem like the right number to you?
No, I think 5 is the right number. Well, we'll see.
Right.
I think 5 is the right number. It's certainly better than 15. And you know, the big concern that we heard from teachers was that they were feeling like they were having to teach students how to pass tests, but they weren't preparing them for the world. The big concern we heard from parents were that their kids were over-tested. I mean, this was something that, whether you're Republican, Democrat, conservative, liberal, whether you live in the Valley or the Metroplex or West Texas, that we were hearing from parents all across the state. And the kids need to be the focus of education, not the system of education, not even the school boards or the administrations, but the kids. Are we preparing the kids to compete in a worldwide economy, a world that is changing? And I believe House Bill 5, not only from the testing perspective, but from the two-track perspective. Now kids are going to have an option. Do they want to go to college? Do they want to go that route, which is great, or do they want to maybe go to a vocational route? And we're going to support those kids in both routes.
But the response from a lot of people who supported No Child Left Behind and the Bush administration, people who believe that accountability in public education is necessary, is that by taking the number of tests from 15 down to 5, you're somehow making it possible for kids to get through their experience in public education without adequate accountability for whether they're being taught the way they ought to be taught. Is there enough rigor in the system? Are you letting teachers and schools off the hook?
No, I don't believe we are. I think, you know, there were conversations during the debate on House Bill 5. I know I sat in meetings with the governor and with Commissioner Williams to talk about maybe doing 8 or 9 tests instead of 5. But the process, I mean, 5 was in the bill and 5 was passed on the House floor. So, and again, I'll go back to often one of the things I learned in the legislature is oftentimes you've got a decision. You may not be the best, but you've got a decision from, are we going to have 15 or are we going to have 5? There may be a better choice, but 5 was the choice we had, and that was better than 15, and that's why I voted for it. And that's why the majority of the House.
Can I add to that?
I wish you would.
Dr. Daniels would. We had a lot of educators come down, and I don't think they look at the 15 tests. My understanding is the universities don't look at those tests. So we spend a lot of time on these tests that no one looks at except the year that
So
they're
then why do we have them to begin with? Was it the testing companies that pulled the wool over our eyes here? What happened? No, Senator, I asked this question sincerely. I've asked people, if everybody hates these tests so much and they're of no good use to anybody, whose idea was this? And people go like this.
No, I think you're right. I think that, education, there's no formula for doing it perfectly, and I think it was an effort to hold people accountable and make sure that we were moving students on in the right way, and I think we overdid it. I mean, 15 was too many, and as I said,
This is a sufficient correction.
Yeah, so we'll see how it works. I mean, do we have it perfect? Probably not. There'll be some correction down the road because we're always trying to improve.
Right.
And this was a true effort to listen to parents, to students, to educators, and say, look, we're trying to make this right. Our goal is to do something that will help these kids. That's our goal.
Let me transition over to water and transportation, two issues that you brought up as things that you consider to be agenda items that move forward during the session, and to some degree there's no disputing that. We went into the session knowing we had the worst one-year drought in the history of Texas. I think plus 95% of the state is back in drought conditions. We have a $53 billion water plan, and up until this session, absolutely no money over 50 years to pay for it. On transportation, the different estimates on this, it may be as much as $400 billion over 20 years to maintain current roads at the current level of congestion. You all actually came to some agreement by the end on both water and transportation. But rather than allocating money, even a little bit of money toward those problems, you're kicking it to us, to the voters, in November of this year on water, in November of next year on transportation, to give you all cover on spending the money. I thought we hated California. I thought we hated initiative and referendum. Why not simply appropriate the money yourselves rather than asking us to do it for you?
You know what? I agree with you.
I agree
that was
too.
part of the reason I voted against the budget. I thought Senator Nichols had a very good bill, which would have dedicated sales tax from the sale of autos. My bill that would have dedicated sales tax from auto parts and stopped the diversions. Together, that would have provided about $4 billion, which would have been enough to fund our roads and our maintenance.
Yeah.
And it would have come out of the budget, and it would have come out of money in the future. So we weren't taking out existing revenues. I thought it was a great idea. I think if it had gotten to the floor in either the Senate or the House or both, I think we had a reasonably good chance of passing it.
Do you think that these initiatives, the water and the transportation initiatives, when kicked to the voters, especially water in an off-year election, we already have the lowest voter turnout under ideal circumstances of any state in the country. In an off-year election, are we going to be able to pass this crucial initiative on the ballot in November?
I think we're going to pass it. I think it's got a really good chance. Most of the constitutional amendments that we try to pass, we pass. It's pretty rare that a constitutional amendment doesn't pass.
So you don't think the people who opposed spending any money on anything, and you all know who those folks are, there are some folks who, around the process, just oppose spending money on anything, that they're not going to be able to marshal their folks more readily than the people who support this thing will?
I'm very optimistic. I have not heard a lot of criticism of it. There's always some, but I'm pretty optimistic that it's going to pass.
I like your optimism. Representative, do you think that we have a problem with either of these initiatives getting through when the voters look at them?
Well, if you remember, transportation bill isn't going to be on the ballot until next
Right,
fall.
so that's
they're not going to be on the ballot.
higher turnout in the 2014 elections. That's
Right,
one thing to say.
and the Prop 6, which I encourage everyone to support, and I do think is going to pass. I certainly hope it does. I think, remember that Prop 6 just sets up the State Water Infrastructure Bank outside of the Treasury, and
Right.
we've already voted on taking $2 billion from the rainy day fund to as a one-time lump sum investment in that bank. My problem with the way we did it, and one of the main reasons I voted against the budget at the end of session is these were things that we talked about for months before we even convened in January. The leadership of the governor, the speaker, the lieutenant governor were talking about how important it was that we take care of transportation, that we address water, and yet we weren't voting on them until May. And I understand that I'm new to the process, but it seems to me like if we have priorities, things that we need to get done for the future of the state, that those are the things that we ought to make priorities in the state budget, and we failed to do that.
Right.
And so that's one of the reasons, obviously, the water plan was a three-part plan. I voted against taking the money from the rainy day fund. This should have been part of our budget. Having said that, I'm supportive of Proposition 6, and I do think it will pass.
You understand, Representative Leach, and I'll say the same to Senator Paxton, the budget is a document that has a number, and that's the number, right? Can't go past that number. So if you're talking about taking $2 billion or $3 billion out of GR, general revenue, for water or transportation, as opposed to taking it out of the rainy day fund, that's $2 to $3 billion less for other things.
Yes,
Right.
good point. But if you look at Senator Nichols' bill, which again I think was excellent, it looked into the future. It wasn't taking out existing revenues. It was
Right.
taking out growth. And it made it palatable. And the nice thing about transportation, it takes 10 years to build these roads and to plan them, do the environmentals, do the planning. And so I found it worked really well with the realities of our budget. It wouldn't have affected other areas. It worked really well with the realities of how long it takes to build these roads. That was a very good solution. If you think about the percentage that we're spending on transportation, back in the 40s and 50s, we were spending 50%. That number went down to, a third of the budget in the 70s. Now we're down to 5 or 6%. It's just, it doesn't make sense. It's in my opinion, the fact that we did fund it through the rainy day fund, okay, that's a solution, but I don't think that's the long-term solution.
Not a long-term solution.
I think it's part of the solution, but we really need to address transportation in the budget and allocate it and treat it as something that's important.
On an ongoing basis.
Yes.
During this session, we saw something that we hadn't seen in a while. We had the spectacle of Republicans advocating for fee increases and maybe even in one case a tax increase for the purpose of funding transportation. I thought, cats and dogs would rain down from the heavens when that happened. But, none of this stuff got through. But the situation had become so dire that people like Tommy Williams and Kevin Eltife, no one's idea of liberals, were proposing new revenue sources for transportation. I know that you both are very conservative folks, conservative House member, conservative senator. Should we not be looking at new revenue sources to fund this stuff? Fee increases or, God forbid, a tax increase, given the nature of the problem? Representative, let me ask you that first.
Well, during the campaign, one of the things that I said frequently, based on my study of the budget, is that we had a spending problem and not a revenue problem. I was told by many people who had served for a long time in Austin that I would learn that that's not the case going through the budget process. I can tell you, after having served a session and 3 special sessions, that is the case. We do have a spending problem.
Not a revenue problem.
Yes, we have a. You can't talk about having a revenue problem until you take care of your spending problem. And we do have a spending problem. If you look at our state budget, and let me remind you that we had a multi-billion-dollar surplus coming into this session. And we decided that we were going to spend that surplus on other things as opposed to taking care of what all of us agreed were our priorities for the future of the state: water and transportation and education funding. And so we talk about needing new revenue, but yet we're not willing to go down and talk about finding cuts in our budget. And that's one of the reasons I ended up voting against it.
Do you agree with that we have a spending problem?
Well, let me say, what I've been saying for years is we are diverting money now from the gas tax that should be going to transportation. And it's hard for me to go back to my constituents and say, look, I know we're not spending the money on transportation that we said we were going to, but I need to tax you again. It doesn't make sense. We need to stop. We need to at least be spending money on transportation that we've told our constituents we are, which is why I filed that bill. It's just hard for me to justify new taxes. And I really believe we need to allocate a higher percentage. It's always easy to come back and say, yeah, I want more money, but when we're diverting, 2, we've let that number continue to drop as a percentage of the budget. There needs to be a reasonable percentage of the budget allocated to it. It just doesn't make sense.
Let me ask you, Senator, about Senator Williams' proposal specifically. I was over at TxDOT the other week, and I was shown a document that claims, I can't verify this independently, but they were claiming that we were 40th among the 50 states in terms of the amount of money we ask of drivers each year for things like car registration, driver's license, and so on. 40th out of 50 states. Senator Williams was proposing, in theory, an increase of the car registration fee that all of us would pay when we re-register our cars, and that money would go directly into a transportation fund, and that after a few years it would represent several $1 billion worth of funding. We won't even consider that.
Is that a question?
Yes.
Okay.
My voice went up at the end. That was we won't even consider that?
I don't know if that was rhetorical.
Okay.
Again, I mean, it's hard for me to know when we've got gas tax revenue that's not going towards transportation. I find it very difficult to say, oh yeah, we're just going to do this new fee. How do I know it's actually going to go there? I've been told before that money's going to go someplace, and
You've learned to be skeptical of those things.
Yes, I have. I mean, I am skeptical, and the proof is in the pudding. I mean, it's a reality. We are not spending the money the way we told the voters we would, and until we fix that, I'm not going to agree to hire. And I'm not ashamed that we're not the highest fee and tax state in the
That's
country.
good with you.
Yes.
Yeah. You mentioned that we have a spending problem, not a revenue problem, and that before we put money into new things, we got to get our spending stuff under control. Tell me, Representative Leach, one thing that we're spending money on that we should stop spending money on right now.
Well, I filed, if we had all day, I could give you multiple, but for instance, I filed an amendment during the first reading debate on the budget that we give $26 million approximately every 2 years to the Film and Music Marketing Program in Texas. Not a bad program, lures businesses into Texas, but I believe that education funding is more important than giving money to Hollywood.
Even if the economic development benefits, I know that you were in quite a heated debate on the floor over this topic. The economic development benefits apparently on that program are significantly greater than the outlay that we see every year.
There was, but you have to, and I don't disagree with that, and Representative Chairman Gonzalez and I had a vigorous debate on the House floor.
Vigorous, it was vigorous. It was vigorous.
My first time at the front mic, it was interesting.
Memorable, may as well be memorable,
right.
That's right.
But you know, I really believed in that, and it's the concept behind, and many of us filed amendments to, and my amendment would have taken that money and given it to the retired teachers, which is, to me, a big priority for the state, that we take care of our retired teachers. Not that I don't care about economic development, not that I don't believe that money is effective at luring businesses to Texas and creating more revenue for the state. Yep. But we have to identify and be committed to our priorities.
That's what it's about.
That's if you look at the budget, I actually voted for the first budget that left the House on first reading. I voted for it. Then it left the House and it went to the Senate. The Senate came back with a higher number, not much higher, but a little bit higher. And then it went to conference committee, where normally the conference committee would meet in the middle of those two numbers. Well, the conference committee came back with a higher number than both the House and the Senate voted on. That, to me, is a problem. From the beginning of session, we did not show fiscal restraint. We showed a tremendous appetite for spending money, and I would just like to see that curbed just a little bit for the people that I represent.
Let me quickly toggle over. We have some time left, not an enormous amount, but I want to touch on a couple more things to health care. So you all definitely did something on public ed. You all kind of sort of did something on water and transportation. Hopefully the voters will make it so that this was a successful effort. We went into a session with health care with, as we understood the estimates, 6.2 million uninsured Texans, 28.8% of the state's population without insurance, not counting the underinsured or the underserved. This is without insurance. We like to be first in everything. Well, we're first in that, in both the raw number and the percentage of our citizens who have no insurance. Obviously, this is a conservative state, and the legislature and the governor joined arms and said not just no, but heck no to expanding Medicaid. So we now know what the legislature is opposed to. Tell me, though, what you're for. Tell me, if you don't like doing that, how are we going to get our arms around this massive health care problem, Senator Paxton?
You know, it's interesting. When they passed Obamacare, there were solutions being offered. And look, you're never going to have a perfect, we're not in heaven yet, so we're not going to have a perfect health care system, just like we don't have a perfect education system.
Right.
But there were ideas offered that I thought were reasonable. One is, you know, break down some of the barriers for interstate commerce and allow competition so that there's more synergies and there can be more efficient offering of healthcare services and insurance products. How about tort reform at the federal level? That was another, I think, thing that could have helped drive down costs. I like healthcare savings plans that allow people to put away money tax-free. There are ideas, free market ideas that can work. I don't think Obamacare, government takeover, we were already seeing all these promises. First they told us it wasn't a tax. Well, now it is. They told us it was going to drive down the cost. Well, now it's going to be more expensive. They told us that you could use your same doctor. Well, guess what? You may not be able to do that. There are all these promises made, and I grew up in government health care. My father was in the Air Force, and I can tell you what happens. You end up waiting a long time. Oftentimes you don't get to see the person you need to see. It's rationed. It doesn't work. It just won't. It won't.
Well,
work.
and I hear you, and these are all. I've heard these kinds of arguments. They're good arguments. I agree with that. But tell me something in the affirmative. What at the state level? You mentioned some federal things. At the state level, is there anything that the legislature is doing or should be doing to, in an affirmative way, address this problem? Besides saying no to what has been offered by Washington.
I think most of the cost is being driven at the federal level. You're talking about large insurance companies. You're talking about a very large problem. They have to break down these barriers to entry into the states. That's I think one of the best solutions that they could offer us is break down those barriers so that there can be competition across state lines. That would make a huge difference.
Now, Representative, you actually were in the center of this issue during this legislative session. You know, the state may or may not have had the opportunity to negotiate with the federal government to get as much flexibility as possible in exchange for leveraging those federal dollars. But you actually were involved with a discussion on the floor that would have tied the hands of the Commissioner of Health, Kyle Janik, without the legislature's blessing, and the legislature actually wants to be institutionally in the room with the commissioner if there's going to be any discussion. So you kind of actually took Texas a step back from expanding Medicaid.
Well, I don't know if I'd put it that way. I mean, under current law, before I filed my amendment and it passed the House and the Senate, under current law, the commissioner and the governor can go up to the federal government and negotiate Medicaid expansion on behalf of the people of Texas without any input whatsoever from the legislature. And with as much of a liability as that could be for the future of Texas, I thought that was a big problem. And by the way, so what my amendment would have done is it just would have involved the legislature in the process. With as much money as we're talking about here, as much impact as it will have on the future of Texas, the legislature, the people that you send to Austin to advocate on your behalf, ought to be involved in that decision. And I had the governor's support on it. Commissioner Janik supported the amendment as well. They didn't want to be responsible alone for going up and negotiating on behalf of the 26 million people in Texas. The legislature needs to be involved in that process. And so if that means having to come back next spring for a special session on Medicaid, on health care, then let's do it. Because that's what we're elected to do, and we ought to be involved.
So the affirmative step that you would say the legislature will take in this case is crafting what Kathleen Sebelius called a Texas solution. The federal government is now talking about being open to some kind of, the phrase Texas solution always makes me laugh. That's like healthcare slathered in barbecue sauce. What does that mean exactly? But that we're somehow going to come up with a Texas solution to this, which would presumably mean allowing us to retain our independence. Give us the money, let us solve the problem. And that would be a special session, would begin the process.
Well, that's exactly right. And the point that I made on the House floor, whether you're, again, Republican or Democrat, whether you believe that we should adopt Obamacare or fight it, like crazy, we ought to come together and be involved in that decision. We ought to have that debate in front of the people of Texas as opposed to sending a couple people on our behalf to Washington to negotiate behind closed doors.
And we've asked for this. We've asked Washington to say, hey, just give us a block grant, let us make our own rules.
Let us figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, every state has different type of population. They have different issues. Give us money. Let us decide how to use it.
No one size fits all.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me ask you last set of questions here about politics. It seemed to be coming out of the session that for all the talk that Texas is a one-party state, Republican, it's actually these days a three-party state. A third Democrat, a third traditional Republican, and a third Tea Party. A third, and a third. Most of this session, the real action was not Republicans fighting Democrats, it was Republicans fighting Republicans. What has happened, Representative Leach, to our politics in the state? Do you agree with that characterization? And kind of help us understand the political landscape that we're confronting today.
Well, I can only speak for me. My job is to represent the people that sent me to advocate on their behalf, the people of House District 67. And again, I spent months upon days upon days and knocking on thousands of doors, working phone banks, doing town hall meetings with my constituents, and I feel like I have a good idea of what they want me to do on their behalf. And so I wouldn't say that I was fighting against other Republicans. I was merely representing my district.
Well, but that may be true. But those both may be true. But you may have been representing the district, but also fighting on behalf of them with other Republicans.
Okay, but let me make a point here that during session it may have seemed like there were three parties, but it's interesting now that all Republicans all across the state are campaigning like they're the second coming of Ronald Reagan. That everyone's using the word conservative. I was conservative. I stood up for you. I fought for limited government. I fought for less spending. When in reality, that's not the case. And so I would encourage the voters, as they're looking at our records and as they're seeking to make decisions in elections all across the state, look at our records. And everyone has to go back home and defend their votes to the people that sent them there. And if the people send them back, then that's good. And if not, then
they own the consequences.
That's exactly right. I don't go down with the intent to fight with fellow Republicans. And I would make the point that there were many things that the people did not see, meetings behind closed doors with leadership and with people from all political stripes to try to find solutions for the people of Texas.
It just looked like they were fighting.
That's right.
Grandstanding in politics. Imagine that. That's what it is.
See, now I think you're wrong. We didn't fight them on Republicans. No, we hate the House, but we didn't fight them.
Oh, that's what it was. I missed it. Oh, that's right. Right. No, but Senator, you're among the most conservative members of the Senate. We knew you would be going in. You didn't disappoint the people who thought you would be going in. And the fact is, you and many of the other conservative members of the Senate found some Republicans wanting in terms of their ideological discipline. Isn't that true?
Well, I don't agree with anybody all the time. I think we worked very well in the Republican caucus in the Senate. It's a very collegial, you need 21 votes. And so you have to find a way to work with not just Republicans, you got to figure out a way, you got to get two Democrats.
In some cases, Democrats.
Yeah, and so it's a very collegial place. It's definitely a different feel than the House.
Right.
The House is sometimes much more of a fight. You've got to find a way to negotiate and work your deal out, because if you can't get the 2/3, you're not going to pass a bill.
So why do you want to leave the Senate if it's so great? If it's so congenial and so refined? It's the Yale Club and the House is Animal House, right? If you like being in the Senate, why do you want to leave?
You said it, I didn't.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not doing this because I want to leave the Senate. I enjoy the Senate. I felt very comfortable the first day I walked in. I felt like I had good relationships. I knew a lot of the senators already. I'd been in the House for 10 years. I felt like I had the opportunity to work effectively. I was on good committees. I worked well with the lieutenant governor. It was a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I'm not leaving because I want to leave the Senate. I'm leaving because I feel like this country, this state, we're in a very significant place, and we've got these battles going on with the federal government, and Texas is key to that fight. I mean, if Texas doesn't defend its sovereignty, if Texas doesn't fight for its own ability to govern itself on economic issues and political issues, then we're going to lose our freedom. And we are also leading other states. Other states are looking to us. And so I felt like it was critically important that somebody that was willing to stand up and say no to Obama, no to Eric Holder, that somebody run. And I felt like I had to do it.
That's why you're doing it.
That's why I'm doing it.
And Representative Leach, in your case, I wonder if you're going to observe the so-called friendly incumbent rule. So you have Republican challengers to incumbents all over the state. Many of them are folks who agree with you, the challengers, who are representing more traditional establishment Republicans. Will you campaign on behalf of challengers to your fellow Republican House members, or will you sit those races out?
No, my focus right now is on my district, on coming back home, talking about what we did during the session and asking people to send me back.
You're not going to mess in anybody else's district?
I don't have any intent right now in getting involved in any races other than the Attorney General race. I am proudly supporting Senator Paxton for Attorney General, and if I have an opponent, then we'll deal with my race. If not, then I'm going to work hard to see that this guy sitting next to me is our next Attorney General.
All right. Let's stop there and give these guys a hand for their candor and willingness to talk. Thank you.
Evan, can I say one thing?
You may.
You know, I've been very fortunate to represent Collin County for 11 years now, and I can tell you, Collin County sent 3 new reps down to Austin: Jeff Leach, Scott Sanford, and Scott Turner. I can make the argument that you sent some of the best representatives that we've ever had, and I really appreciate it because I love working with them. They're hardworking, they're smart, they're energetic, and they did an amazing job for learning the system quickly and making a difference. And Jeff was one of those people, and I'm proud that I got to serve with these guys because they did an amazing job. Thank you.
Great, thank you. Great. All right, so we're going to open up the floor for questions for the balance of our time.
Both of you have voted in the past in favor of private school vouchers, and 7 Texas cities have Scientology missions. Why is that a good idea to vote for private school vouchers when any religion can take taxpayer money away from public education?
Let's be sure that the premise of the question is correct. Do you both support vouchers?
I'll say it like this. I support parents having a choice and the money following the parents. I've always believed in competition, whether it's in the business world or government. Competition makes all of us better. I have to compete in my job, and I have to compete in the legislature. If I don't do a good job, somebody can replace me. I have no problem.
So the questioner's point is that under one proposed voucher system, parents would be allowed to take tax dollars, public money, and migrate those dollars out of the public system to parochial or private schools where accountability measures would not follow. That's the big argument, you know, Senator, right?
Well, yeah, that was. I had a bill that was more. It was a tax credit. It didn't
take public dollars.
Right, that's exactly right. It was a tax credit.
What do you think is the holdup when it comes to getting true sustainable transportation funding, resolving some of these transportation issues that we're talking about, and also ending the diversions from Fund 6? Because we can talk about putting bills out there and championing them, but why are they not getting passed?
Yeah, Senator Paxton, where is the obstacle to getting these things done?
I think it's the media.
Is it the
No,
media?
no.
Wow, okay.
Thank you.
It's your fault.
Okay.
Next. Can we move on?
I never have to run for re-election. That's fine, actually. So, no, really, seriously, what is the
You know, I find it very frustrating because I think the majority of the House, the majority of the Senate liked the plans that we were proposing. The appropriators, the leadership of the House and the Senate decided that wasn't the direction they wanted to go. That's, I guess, the benefit of being in charge of appropriations or Senate finance. We heard the bills in committee. I was there, presented them, and they didn't get out of committee.
Somewhere there was a bottleneck.
There was a bottleneck, and it was frustrating because I truly believe you put that bill on, you put those bills, Nichols and my bills, on the floor of the House or the Senate, I think they pass.
They passed. Representative, what did you see in the House? What was the obstacle to this?
I completely agree, and thanks for your question. The process is very frustrating in that respect, that there's a lot of good pieces of legislation, transportation specifically. Linda Harper Brown had a great bill, and I would have loved to have seen that bill come up for debate on the House floor. That bill would have passed. And that bill could have not solved the problem, but it could have put a huge dent in it. We should not have been in a third special session addressing the issue of transportation for Texas, especially when we were talking about it last fall, about how it was going to be a priority for the session. So I agree with you completely, and I think it's never too early to start working for next session, and I'm committed to doing that with you.
Gentleman right here, sir.
Yes, sir. Senate Bill 1333, is related to the creation of the Cotton Belt Improvement District. It was critical to the cities of Plano, the city of Richardson, to the University of Texas at Dallas, and to the entire North Texas area. Senator Paxton, you're a member of the Intergovernmental Relations Committee. Would you share your insights on why this bill did not come out of this committee? And Representative Leach, would you share your position on this bill, even though it never got to the House?
Say a word, if you would, Senator, about what this bill would have done.
Well, it was designed to help create the Cotton Belt line running through parts of certain cities, and mostly not Fort Worth, but Dallas and Richardson. And, the bill was filed as late as it could be filed. It was filed on the deadline. So the bill, it was a very complicated bill. It was filed on the deadline. When we saw it, it came through committee. It was Senator Corona's bill.
Yep.
And it had a lot of issues. The main problem we saw after we kind of worked through some of the issues, and my staff worked on that bill more than any other bill that we had. We basically dropped everything that we had going to see if we could resolve some of the issues. And we worked with the numerous cities involved, from Richardson, Addison, I don't remember all the cities, Dallas. And one of the struggles we had was, in concept, the cities were behind the bill, but in reality, no one would publicly say that they were supporting this particular bill. And so we tried to work through that issue. We got a lot of the cities on board, including Richardson, but ultimately, we didn't have all the cities on board for now, they might say they were on board in concept, but they wouldn't put in writing.
On this specific bill.
Yeah, I mean, they were asking us to pass a bill that they wouldn't put in writing and say, yeah, we're for this bill. We're for the concept, but we don't know if we're for this bill.
Particular bill. Representative Leach, this stuff is sometimes more complicated than it appears.
Well, it was a very complicated bill, and let me mention that the Cotton Belt could revolutionize this part of the Metroplex. I mean, we need this for this part of the city, specifically UTD, to have a station right here so people can come from all over the world to this institution on a train from the airport, not even have to rent a car. I mean, it's here, and we need it. You've got my commitment on it. I don't know if that bill was the perfect bill. It certainly happened too late in the process to try to push something that complicated through. But as I mentioned to Steve, it's never too early to start working on it for next session. And that's something that has to be a regional bill, not just Collin County, not just 3 of us. I mean, we got to get 30 or 40 representatives and senators on board with that to make progress on it in the House.
He's making a list for next time, you all. You hear that, right?
I actually think we were very close to getting that passed. If we'd had a little more time and we'd had buy-in from...
Let me at the risk of poking a finger in the eyes of people not here to defend themselves, let me ask a question. You've both mentioned at various points the idea of leadership, that maybe there was an obstacle from the leadership perspective. Were the Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor the problem in this session with things that you wanted to get done, getting done? Let me just ask it straight away. Representative?
Let me make 2 points on that. The Speaker, from a personal perspective, Speaker Strauss, was nothing but good to me. He let me represent my district. There was no bill that I couldn't file that I wanted to file. There was no vote that I took that I didn't feel like I could take. And all of the concerns that I've expressed today are concerns that I've previously expressed to him directly and to his staff. So in that respect, during session, they had an open door for a freshman.
You're not talking behind his back.
No, not at all. These are things that I've expressed to him. This wouldn't be a surprise, and it's not just him. There's committee chairs that run the process, and it was a big learning experience for me. So to have the Speaker and the leadership support me in that was much appreciated. Having said that, there were some very real concerns about some of the bottleneck of really good legislation, really good conservative legislation that could have been good for the people of Texas. For instance, the pro-life bill. We had 95 votes on that bill in the regular session, and it couldn't get to the floor.
Problem was the Senate, wasn't it? That you didn't have 21 with the 2/3 rule in effect.
Well, and I'm just using that as an example, but it still should have gotten to the floor. If you have that many supporters on the co-author sheet of the bill, that's a bill that I believe should get to the floor. Regardless of the Senate, you ought to just... Right, and I'm not saying that's the Speaker's fault himself, but I think we ought to have a little bit more commitment to some of those ideas that, us conservatives, Evan, were seen as the no-birds late in session. People started calling us the no-birds, how we were voting no on everything, and what people didn't see is all the productive solutions that we were putting forward all throughout session. Bills we filed, meetings we had behind closed doors, in committee hearings. We had some really good ideas that I would have liked to have seen get to the House floor.
Get there. Was the Lieutenant Governor, Senator Paxton, an obstacle to some of the things you wanted
I
getting
think,
done?
I always blame the House, remember that. So
Right, okay,
back to the
sorry.
House. I
I
want to
noticed
stay,
once, I haven't blamed the Senate.
We'll
I
edit
wanna
this
stay
out
with
when
that
we do
theme.
the tape, that's fine.
I want to stay with that theme. No, the Senate is different than the House. The Senate has the 21 rule, and it's
Right.
the challenge is you've got to have 2 Democrats and every Republican. And so what I learned in committee, everything really, most everything gets decided in committee. It's really different than the House. Because if you come out of committee and you've got 2 Democrats voting at your bill, it's a message to the other Democrats, don't vote for it.
Don't support it, right.
And so you've got to really work your committee and try to put together a coalition of Democrats, because you don't want them sending the signal to the other Democrats. It's okay if 1 votes or 2. If you've got all of them voting against you, it's very difficult to pass.
Will there be a new Lieutenant Governor next session?
There's a race.
I know. I've heard, that's why I'm asking. Will there be a new Lieutenant Governor?
That's a hypothetical that I don't know the answer to.
You know what I'm going to ask you, don't you, Representative Leach?
I've got a pretty good feeling.
Will there be a new
about this.
speaker next session?
I don't know. It's way too early to talk about that now. I really don't know. I haven't, to be honest, Evan, I haven't really thought about it. There's a lot of important races across the state.
I'm going to let you off the hook on that, okay. Other questions? Ma'am, and then over here, please, and then over to this table. This table is going to, the whole room is going to lean very heavily on the question and answers.
I'm going to go easy on you too, but I
thank
do
you.
have an education question. There's a bill that passed the House and the Senate, and Senator Paxton, you carried it at our request in the Senate, 2824. And this is a bill that would support basically doing some innovative R&D to help us innovate education. So there was really good bipartisan support. It passed both houses. Why do you think the governor vetoed it?
Was that Representative Ratliff's bill?
Yes.
I don't know why the governor vetoed it. I haven't talked to him specifically about that bill. If you hear it, please let me know.
So I passed it in the Senate 30-0. I asked the governor's liaison, we got any problems? I was told no, and then we got the veto. So I was never given an explanation. I've never had a bill vetoed. I thought it was a great bill. It provided school districts all kinds of different opportunities that they don't have now, and I was really, really disappointed that it was vetoed.
We had a question over here. This Agnes right here. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you, and thank you both for your service.
Thank you.
You were very hospitable to those who don't live in your district who came to pester you, and I really appreciate it. Got 2 quick questions, if I might. The first is tuition revenue bonds. You heard Dr. Daniels talking about the growth here. We've had over 100,000 students added to our public schools since the last TRBs were passed. What happened?
Right. Right, in fact, we had the spectacles, speaking of spectacles, UT Austin is now borrowing money to build the College of Engineering building. If I read the papers correctly over the last couple of days, that was a big project that was part of the TRBs, didn't go anywhere. So what happened? What should happen?
We had a bill in both houses. It was,
Wouldn't it have passed in a special if the governor had put it on the call?
oh yeah, but it should have passed. It should have passed. We had it done. There were some differences between the House and the Senate. As you know, when there are differences, it goes to conference. It went to conference. The Senate appointed a conference committee, and the House refused to appoint a conference committee. And so, because the House leadership on that committee decided not to appoint a conference committee, we couldn't negotiate the differences. And so the House, that particular conference committee, decided that it was kind of a take it or leave it deal. And,
Yeah.
and we were in this position where we had some things to work out. And they
The
said
answer was leave it.
They said no.
Yeah, I actually missed that vote in the House. People ask you, do you have any regrets or anything that you would have done differently? I don't have one regret, but it was unfortunately missed that bill. I was in another meeting, but I would have voted to support it. I don't know why it didn't come up in the special session. We pushed hard for it. It just didn't.
That was
hopefully it'll
one of the
come
most
back up.
frustrating, along with the bill we just talked about, one of the most frustrating votes to me, because I thought it was done, or at least we were within range. And, for some reason, the House decided not to negotiate, and it fell apart.
Quick second question.
Second question, very quickly. The water bill, the resolution we're voting on in November, thank you both. We're headed in the right direction. The biggest challenge that urban water systems has is not so much the funding, because in many cases they can support that with revenue bonds. The challenge we have is in siting new reservoirs. do you anticipate that the legislature might be willing, as it develops the details of the long-range water plan, do you anticipate the state helping these urban centers with the siting of reservoirs when there's such contentious debate about where they go?
Representative.
Yes, I do. One of the frustrating things with the water bill, although we made much progress in taking the $2 billion investing in water, for different parts of the state, there's different answers. Water is not the only answer. Or, I'm sorry, money is not the only answer to solve the problem. And so, yes, we got to come back and permitting, desalination, other issues, gray water, issues across the state where solutions may be different. We got to make some progress on these issues.
The reality, Senator, is by the time we get into the 25th and 30th and 35th year of the water plan, technology may revolutionize what we're doing, and it may bring the cost down. It may be a different plan.
That's correct.
Right.
Hopefully that's what happens.
Right.
But at least, I mean, what I like about it, we at least made progress. I mean, Jeff and I are 2 of 181 legislators, and guess what? We don't get to decide everything. If we did, the world would be perfect and good. But we didn't get to decide everything. But I do feel like we made progress on a lot of our major issues.
We have time for one more question.
The young guy. Young guy.
All right, I'm going to just say by fiat, we're going to take both. Okay, so we'll do
Thanks
yours,
for
and then we'll
taking the
do-
question. My question is about scorecards. I know you don't represent a scorecard, but scorecards are a big tool that a lot of your voters use and rely on. To what degree do you think that they're important, and how much do you pay attention to them as you're going on? Are there any in particular that you really like?
Boy, that's an interesting question. I don't pay attention during session to scorecards. I don't really know who's keeping scorecards until after they're released. Obviously, you know the big ones that you hear about a lot, but no, look, my job down there is to vote my district, to represent my constituents, and if you're constantly worried about what some other organization or some other individual, for that matter, the speaker, the governor, the lieutenant governor is telling you to do, then you miss why you're down there. You forget the people that actually sent you down there to vote on their behalf. And that's one thing that going down I really tried to remember and focus on is to vote my district, which, by the way, is what all the speaker asked me to do, is just to vote your district.
Vote your district.
Yes, that's right.
Senator, we have kind of gotten into a little bit of scorecard mania, haven't we, over the last couple
Well,
of
it's interesting, I guess we have, but the reality is we don't know what the votes are on the scorecard for the most part, and so, I mean, I make my decisions based on what I think is good, what's the best policy. The reality is a lot of legislation, you might like some of it, not all of it. A lot of people think if you vote yes on legislation that you like it all. It's not always that easy. Most of the time it's not that easy. There are times that I want to rip things out. I don't get to decide that. Even on my own bills. You know, I always do perfect bills, and then they go and amend them. They always amend them. And then I have to decide.
Or they get vetoed.
That's right. Then you have to decide whether you're going to vote on your own bill. But most of these scorecards, we don't know what issues they're grading us on. And so they're important after the fact, just to say this is, whether it's the Sierra Club or whatever, Texans for Fiscal Responsibility.
But the votes are also, that are counted on the scorecards, in fairness, they're also counted selectively. People choose votes that matter to their group, and that's the basis for the...
Oh, absolutely. They all do it.
Okay. We're taking pity on you. Last question, okay? Boy, it better be a good one. Nope, no pressure. Well, actually, it's this young gentleman over here. I'm sorry. No disrespect. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm normally not an incredibly involved person politically, especially in state politics. But there was one issue that captured my focus this legislative session, and that was the issue of allowing CHL holders to have handguns on college campuses. Now, I personally emailed both of you, and you voiced your support, and I saw that you co-authored the applicable bills in your houses. But in the end, the measure did not pass the Texas legislature. Could you comment on that issue and perhaps what might be done to ensure passage in the future?
We've been talking in the legislature, Senator Paxton, about concealed handguns on college campuses for several sessions.
That's correct.
Right, yeah. So
yeah, I mean, we have that 2/3 rule in the Senate, and it went to John Whitmire's committee, and he's a Democrat, and he didn't want to push it out. And so,
does the fact that he's a Democrat have anything to do with it, Senator? He just may oppose it.
Well, I think there was unanimity there. I think there were certain issues.
You think it's a party line vote if it were to come to the House?
We had meetings about it with the caucus chairman and John Whitmire, and you know they had their bills that they were going to let out, and other bills they weren't. And they have enough votes to stop it. There's not much. If they decide that's not one of them, there's really nothing that can be done in the Senate.
It wouldn't have been a partisan vote in the House. There were plenty of Democrats that would have voted for the campus carry bill. I think if there's one thing we've learned today is that there's a lot of good legislation that dies. And that's just the process is designed to do that. That's actually a good thing in many instances. It's hard to get legislation passed, but the problem is that sometimes some good bills die. It was just a victim of the process. We'll come back again and try it next session, though.
My recollection, Representative and Senator, is that a number of campus presidents around the state, as well as a number of campus police chiefs, opposed this legislation. So let me ask you, as a final question, why does the legislature get to put its point of view ahead of those people who are actually on those campuses? Senator.
Well, I mean, we're talking about a constitutional issue. I think it's bigger than just campuses. It's about safety and protection and how those bills are actually drafted. And we never got to vote on a bill, so I don't know specifically how the bill would have turned out and whether we could have negotiated to make the college presidents happy with it. That's a possibility.
Never got to that point.
We never got to the point where we had the discussion or the debate. I would have at least liked to have the debate and hear the debate from people that are opposed or for, and oftentimes you end up with a much better bill because you've heard different angles on the debate. I would have loved to have heard it.
Representative Same?
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, Dr. Daniel, we talked about this issue. The communication is key in the legislature. It's important to communicate with the people who are involved, who are impacted by the bills, so that we can work together to find good bills. And that's what we do. For instance, we passed a bill that the governor signed into law that allows students to carry in their cars on college campuses. That's a win for the Constitutional, for the Second Amendment. And so we just got to come back next session. There's no reason we can't work together on these issues and communicate and try to come up with a workable solution that protects the constitutionally guaranteed right.
Good. We're very fortunate to have had the opportunity to be here on the University of Texas at Dallas at Richardson campus with these two who are good public servants who are doing your business down in Austin, and whether you agree with them or disagree with them, I think we can all agree today they were here, willing to be here, answer questions, and we should thank them all for that. Representative Leach and Senator Paxton, thank you all for coming. Dr. Daniel, thank you. I hope we'll see you again at another one of our events. Thanks very much.